Welcome, guys, to the official Pretotyping podcast, where we basically talk about everything to do with Pretotyping. And so in this season, you will learn about different aspects of the methodology, hear from different Pretotyping practitioners, and even see us try to make our own, all in the spirit of validating your idea with your own data. I'm Jonathan Sun.
And I'm Robert Scrub.
This episode is sponsored by Exponentially. Supercharge your innovation process and get certified as a world-class Pretotyper with the official Learn Pretotyping online course. Sign up using the code OG100 for $100 off. Learn from Exponentially's CEO and master Pretotyper, Leslie Berry, and develop your own Pretotype with personal feedback from Leslie. You will also gain access to the Exponentially app, an enterprise-level tool to help you keep track of your Pretotypes and join an exclusive Slack community of certified Pretotypers. Sign up today at www.exponentially.com/learn-pretotyping, and use the code OG100 for $100 off. Now, our next guest, Patrick Copeland, is the current vice president for Amazon Ads. Prior to this, he was the senior engineering director at Google and Alberto's former manager at Google. He was famous for allowing Alberto to take a week off at his job to write Pretotype It, and continues to support the movement today. How are you doing today, Pat?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on your podcast. I'm really excited to talk to you.
No worries, no worries. I do have to ask. I really like the lamp in your background. Like, where did you get that? Where did you get that lamp?
It's actually a LifeX light. So it's actually 5 different lights that are just, you can make them whatever color you want. So I just have them kind of in a rainbow configuration tonight.
That's impressive. That's impressive. Is it usually like that?
Yeah, I usually have it like doing like a lava lamp actually. So in the background, it's always kind of evolving into some different shape. But lately I've had it as just colors of the rainbow. Although my daughter told me it's not quite rainbow because red should be first, but I did my best.
Yeah, I don't remember my colors of the rainbow, so I would have thought that it was just. It's been a while since I've actually paid attention to the colors of the rainbow like that. So, how's the snow been? I heard that Seattle snowed like crazy the last couple of days. Like, did you get a chance to enjoy it?
Well, I don't know about enjoy. I had to go out and for the first time in about 5 years, shovel snow in order so that I could get down the driveway. My wife was coming back in town and needed to pick her up at the airport. So I spent, I don't know, about 45 minutes out shoveling snow. So, but it was quite a downpour or snow experience, the largest I've seen in a long time. So Seattle did okay though. Usually Seattle just, if you get like a quarter of an inch, like the whole city falls apart. But this time it kind of like went on okay. So, but the whole country is kind of under a big snow slam right now. So we're not the only ones. So I guess even Texas, which is kind of surprising.
I heard because I used to live both in Texas and in Seattle, so like I kind of tracked the weather a little bit in both places out of curiosity, and like it was crazy to see like kind of like Houston hit like below 30 and stuff like that. And it's weird looking at the weather forecast. It's like Monday it's hitting below 30, and by Sunday it's going north back to like 72. It's like, wow. On Monday you have to have a big puffer jacket, and on Sunday you're wearing a t-shirt and shorts.
Well, and it'll probably be 100 degrees in 3 months. It'll be 100 degrees and 95% humidity, in certain parts of Texas, and it'll be blazing hot. It's amazing. Yeah. This cold snap. But it only happens once in a while, I guess. So Seattle isn't used to snow. It's used to rain. And so I was actually hoping for rain today, which was kind of a strange thing. I'm like, I hope it rains. So it gets rid of all the snow.
I get it. I totally get it. I remember the snowmageddon 2 years ago. I think it was 2019. That was the one that I experienced. And every day, like to go and when I would have to go shopping, I would have to de-ice my car and everything. And because the city was so hilly, so like I had to memorize which streets were like hilly and which streets were like flat.
Yeah.
because like I made the mistake on driving on one hilly up climb on the snow, and then my brakes kind of got stuck. So my brakes wouldn't go and my accelerator wouldn't go either. And then like I would hit on nothing and my car would just like kind of kind of like
Yeah.
go backwards by itself. And I was like, holy moly, I gotta figure something out. Luckily, I've played enough driving video games to
Yeah.
figure out how to like drive backwards. But
I think that's the key, is just to gun it all the time, just to go forward. Just gun
yeah.
it and go through the snow. Especially if you have rear wheel drive, you're kind of hosed in deep snow.
Oh man! Shout out to anybody that bought rear-wheel drive cars in Seattle. You guys made a not you guys did not make a good decision.
No.
With that being said, let's draw the attention over to kind of like your career and like what you've been doing so far. But to kick it off in like almost a reverse chronological order, um, currently you work as kind of like as a vice president for Amazon ads. How would you compare that job to like how you used to be a senior engineering director at Google?
You know, different companies, but I feel like a similar set of things that I wanted to accomplish personally. It was all about trying to find places where I could innovate. And so they're both very large and successful companies. And um, sometimes in that situation, you can find yourself, kind of doing a straightforward role that you're expected to. But what I tried to do in both companies was to find places where I could actually do what I wanted to do, which was invent things, try new things, explore, and try to take the technology that was existing and find new ways to apply it. So the differences between the companies, I would say, from an innovation and interest in innovation, are about the same. The culture is very different between the two companies, especially when I joined Google in 2005, 2006. It was I mean, I'm sure it's a very different company than it is today, but it was a very different company compared to Amazon today. And I'm sure that was true. It's true of every company. You go through these evolutions, but Google started from almost like a college campus where there was a lot of randomness and a lot of projects always going on. And over time, it kind of realized as they became teenagers, it's like, hey, we need to be a business, and we need to focus on delivering things that customers are gonna, like. And there were many of these failures that we were seeing, like I don't know if you remember Google Wave, or
Yeah.
every company has these things. And there was just a lot of entropy going on, a lot of kind of projects that weren't super focused on the customer. Now, that I'm just generalizing, because there were plenty that were. Search, I think, is extremely successful, but there were a lot of other projects that were kind of like just chaos in the system. People would just dream them up and do them, and then kind of like try to figure out how to release them, and get them aligned uh, with Google. We had at one point, like hundreds and hundreds of apps, web apps. I don't know if you remember that one homepage where it's like, you click other apps and it would just go to this long list, and it just got longer and longer and longer and longer and longer.
Yeah, I do.
So in some ways, like, I think that's how companies go when they don't have a focus. And but I loved Google. I mean, it was one of the best companies I ever worked for. And I thought the culture was really great. It was very open, but there was a lot of chaos too. And it wasn't the most business oriented company that I ever worked for at that time. Amazon is much more business focused. I think there's a high focus on innovation, but there's also a lot of discussion about what we're trying to do as a company. And once you get agreement on that, there's a lot of alignment around making that happen. So it's a little different in that way than Google, where it was more kind of a survival of the fittest in some ways, and you're always kind of living in the shadow of search and ads. Um, at Amazon, I feel like that there is a chance to differentiate and come up with new things, and there's actually an interest in doing that beyond what currently exists. So I would say that's one of the big cultural differences.
It's interesting that you mentioned the Google failed products because obviously, when Alberto kind of goes into his like prototyping lectures a lot, he mentions a lot about like Google Wave. For us, like the biggest meme around was Google Plus. We would sit around and like make memes of it all the time. Every time we would like clown each other for like using social networks, we'd make point fingers to like the most awkward or like not as sociable guy when we were like younger. We'd be like, hey, I bet he uses Google Plus or something like that. Just
Yeah,
something like real silly like that. Because like I think Google Plus was kind of, when did it come out? It was like 10 years ago. It was around
yeah,
10 years ago, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it started by this guy named Vic Gundoptra, who was, I think he had good instincts at first. There were all of these kind of nascent social networks going on, and he tried to invent this thing called open social, which would have basically federated social activity and allowed you to kind of orchestrate it from Google, of course. But it was kind of pulling together everybody's social streams, and then you could say, like, I want my posts to go to this one and this one and this one, and I want to receive, posts in the central feed from these. It's kind of like an RSS feed on steroids in a way. And that evolved into, hey, Facebook looks like they're really taking off. We better go come up with a responsive product. And so he did kind of the mortal sin of innovation is like copy someone else. And it might have actually been a better version of Facebook than Facebook itself, the way that it was built and the infrastructure, and it didn't have to cut any corners on scaling. But it the problem with it was they didn't build something that people loved, and they didn't build the the application around a use case that people were excited about. And so they kind of did it backwards in a way. And so Alberto and I both witnessed that firsthand. And we were both really disappointed in how it was going. And we knew, I mean, there were many people inside the company that thought it was going to fail, and were not excited at all about Google Plus. But you kind of had to salute the flag to some degree, and I was a part of that flag saluting a little bit. But it was a pretty disappointing failure for the company, and I think a pretty good lesson that you can't just copy somebody else. It's not about first to market. Definitely has its advantages, but you've got to build love around your products, and that's something that didn't happen in that case. But at one point there were hundreds and hundreds of people working on that around the world, and there was just a feeling of dread that it wasn't going to be a success. And it's like, if you build it, they will come is just so untrue. But it was like a massive soccer stadium that was built very, very well, but no games being played, no reason to go there, and so there just wasn't enough attractant to create a social network. Just didn't work. At the
Yeah.
fundamental level, it was just built backwards, I think.
It was interesting because I think I do remember during that time about how much hype was created externally around Google Plus. Like I just remember, seeing all the ads online, making it out to be the next big thing. And I think around that time, I probably was only in middle school. I might have been around 13 or 14, like when it like, really started like, trying to make waves. And I legitimately thought it could be the next big thing. But then that's what your mind gravitates towards, like when you're 13 or 14. And then of course but I tried it out. Like I do remember trying it out a couple of times, and like it did feel a little bit clunky compared to Facebook, but then I always had that thought in my mind, like, okay, maybe it'll get better, that sort of thing. It's kind of like the first time ever using Snapchat, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Snapchat felt really awkward when I first used it too. But
Yeah. Well, but I think that people will use a terrible product interface if it does something useful. So like Craigslist is not a beautiful user experience,
it's one of the
right?
worst. Yeah.
Reddit isn't the best user experience, but it has a great function and it brings people together in and solves a problem that people want solved. I think in the case of Google Plus, it just there wasn't interest in joining a social network from scratch. There wasn't that bootstrapping of like college students getting excited about it and it kind of virally exploding. It just didn't have that draw. And so you need that in order to be a successful product, is some amount of people who love it. And I don't think that we built that product. It was a copy. It didn't differentiate. It like the other day I was thinking about the Bumble IPO
Hmm.
and about the how why is that an interesting story? And a lot of people talk about the CEO is female and she's young and she's the first female billionaire to be a CEO and founder. But I think a much more interesting story is that they invented something that people loved in an otherwise commoditized space. That company really built a product that was in the dating app space. It's filled with a lot of players, and they were able to come up with something that was different and was interesting to customers, and was able to be successful in a kind of like a space where you'd say like, oh well, that's done. Just like when like browsers, like everybody was like, well, browsers are done. Like, why do you want to compete with Netscape? Well, Chrome said like, we can do a better one. We can integrate more features into it. We can make it put the Omni bar where you can type searches. So I think that when I think about building a product, like you have to come up with something that people really love. And in the case of Bumble and a bunch of Google products too, they were able to capture people's imagination. But Google Plus was not one of those, for sure.
Yeah. Or I mean, what's a social product that's gaining a lot of virality today? Clubhouse. I think Clubhouse is like the newest fad that everybody's been on. That I've spent the last few months hosting events on, and it's been pretty fun. Gotta say. Um, I gotta ask about the prototyping backstory.
Okay.
Um, I think because I know that you kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier. So what was, I think, kind of like the origin story of like how prototyping was invented?
Well, I guess the first thing is Alberto was interested in coming back to Google, and somehow I became aware of his interest, and I was like, I love this guy. I love this guy on paper. I haven't met him yet, but I think that he'd be really interesting to work with. And when I met him, I mean, Alberto, if you've seen him in any of his talks, he's that way in real life. Like that's his personality. He's 100% that way. Very exciting, very energizing, positive, kind of forward, and very practical as well. And so I thought like this guy would do great things. And I'm not sure what he's going to do. And honestly, his job was kind of a prototype in some ways because I wasn't quite sure what his job was. I knew that he would be an interesting person to join the team and to do things at Google, but I really didn't know exactly what his job was. Now it became kind of the whatever he called himself, like the agitator, um, the adjutant. I'm not quite sure exactly what his internal title was, but it was titles at Google you could just make up, and so he just became like the innovation adjutant at some point. I was America's top model, by the way. That was actually my formal title at Google. So you could come up with whatever you want. So we kind of invented ourselves, like what we wanted to do in our jobs as well. And so once Alberto had started, we kind of sat down and started doing one-on-ones together. We actually shared an office. we we'd just have talks like, what do you think we need to do? And Alberto started to point out, like, look at all of the ideas in the Google idea database. There were literally like 100,000, 200,000 ideas. And when the press like heard about this stuff, like they would just be super excited, all the geniuses at Google, there's 200,000 ideas. Like, that's incredible. That's awesome. Like, just think about like the amount of potential all those ideas have. But, we realized that the ideas in and of themselves were really worthless and nothing. And that having a database of ideas wasn't really changing the company. What we needed were people that could do innovation. Totally different, ideation versus somebody that can actually take an idea and come up with a concept that's doable, and build confidence and actually deliver it. And through that talking, he came up with some talking points and started to work on formalizing this idea. And he does this thing where he goes off on a retreat I don't know if he still does it, but every year when I knew him, when we worked together, he would go on a retreat by himself, like literally go to a place where there's no one around him and he can completely be by himself. And he just spends time thinking about like things he wants to solve. And he's done all kinds of different inventions since I've known him. But one of those inventions was he came back and he said, like, I have this idea, called pretotyping. And pretotyping, he described it and talked about a bunch of stories that he thought were interesting. And we were excited about it. And, one of the things that I told him to do was, you need to write it down because it's too complicated I wouldn't say complicated. It's very simple, but people don't want to hear like a 30-minute version of something. They want to be able to like read it. They want to be able to do it at their pace. And also, Alberto would never be able to scale to talk to 1 million people. And so we thought like the best way to do this would be in writing. You could make a video, I guess, but it was like books are a way that you could do it. And so he literally did the beginning of pretotyping as a pretotype, where he wrote it up on a 8.5 by 11 paper, folded it in half, and I think it was like a 50-page book or something, where he walked through the concepts of pretotyping. And on the cover of it is actually the the guy who invented the Palm Pilot, who went into his garage and cut a piece of wood and would walk around with it in his pocket, with a wood stylus and pretend to be using it. And the idea was a pretendotype, because you're pretending that the product exists, because building something can be infinitely expensive in terms of your time and in terms of the cost to the company. And so like, how could you build confidence towards your idea at the soonest possible stage? And that can happen in the ideation phase, or as you're trying to determine who your customer is. And so in the case of Palm Pilot, the customer was the inventor himself. Like, would I use it? So it's not about like, can I build it? Because can you build it? Google could build anything it wants to build. Google could put its mind to building any product in the world. And like we talked about, Google Plus, it put its mind to it and it built it. The question is that a good idea? And why are you building it? You're building it for a group of people. Can you identify those group of people and build confidence that people will love it? And I think that was kind of the initial genesis of pretendotyping, which became pretotyping because that word was just too long. And he went around the company and he evangelized it quite a bit. He talked to people and people got excited. And so little teams started to adopt it. and they started challenging the process of innovation inside Google, and it just kind of spread like wildfire from there. And we did talks about it, like people outside the company um, wanted to hear about it. At one point, there were talks in London, New York, San Francisco. They were just starting to pop up all over the place. So it's one of these things that just kind of virally took off without too much publicity, actually. And so that was kind of, I'm fast forwarding a little bit, but it went from literally a booklet to people wanting to have keynotes about it in, I don't know, maybe 6 to 9 months from the time that he went off on his solo journey to think about it. So the ideas are really strong, and they kind of stood by themselves. And once I saw the enthusiasm and the effectiveness of those ideas, not only did I get behind him and like encourage him to do this as a full-time gig, and also to do it as a full-time thing within Google, but I also adopted the ideas myself. And so I'm not only a Hair Club for Men owner, like I'm a Hair Club for Men user. Like I believe in what Alberto is doing deeply, and use it every day. So maybe you have some questions about the origin beyond the high level, but it was a really exciting time. I mean, to see an idea go from literally, you know, a piece of paper or just talking to Alberto, to seeing people really wanting it, paying for it. CEOs of companies like Coca-Cola, Kellogg, coming to Google and wanting to hear Alberto talk about it. It was amazing, but it just shows like how powerful these thoughts are, and how they unlock people from thinking about innovation in a really traditional way. And it inspired innovation all over the world. I mean, it already has impacted global companies, and I know it has, because I've seen the effect of it, and I've talked to people, and I've even evangelized it now at Amazon. So there are people who pop up all the time, and I don't even remember having the conversation, but they say, I've started using Pretotyping as part of my job, and it's helped me so much in the way that I've thought about innovation and how to make it happen.
It's really impressive to see like how prototyping has progressed over the last, I think his first ever lecture, I believe, was like probably around 10 years ago or something like that. His little like YouTube videos when he did like his Stanford lectures on prototyping. It's really impressive to see like how over the last 10 years how it's grown into become such a global movement, to the point where like now there's like a Slack community about it. There's like people popping all around the world trying to run their own like prototyping consultancies. I even attempted to do that myself, to varying degrees of success, I think, because I think probably certain people are like, better suited to that than others. Yeah, it's really impressive. And I'm curious to know, where do you see prototyping going in the future?
That's a good question. Um, I mean, I would just say I use it all the time. So where is it going? I mean, it's going where creators are going. So if people who are creative can figure out how to use it, I'll give you a couple of examples. So when I was at Google, I built this product called Google Wi-Fi. It ended up being one of the top selling mesh routers in the world, and got more awards than any other Amazon hardware product, actually. So it's very successful. It's still the number one seller on Amazon for mesh routers. And this was in a fairly commoditized space of, like at the time, routers were the same chips. They were either Broadcom or Qualcomm, and they were wrapped in plastic and had lots of antennas and fancy names like weapons of mass destruction. And they were very, oriented towards kind of I would guess the young male gamer purchaser. But people all around the world were using Wi-Fi, and they were finding it complicated. They were finding it complex because a lot of the technology is kind of rubbed in your face when you set up a router. You have to, this is like going back a few years ago, but you had to type in, an IP address like 192.168.11, something like that. And then you had to know what an SSID was and know whether to have 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz networks turned on. And one day I was watching my in-laws set up a new router because they had a really old one that and they lived on a golf course and they had interference, and I was just watching them set it up, and it was a total nightmare. Like it was totally unnecessary how complicated it was. And so I thought, like, could we simplify that? And so we built a product kind of from paper of, okay, we know that we could build the hardware. We know that we could easily build the hardware. Why don't we just fake the hardware at first? And so what we did is we took a Chromebook and slapped some antennas on it and put a Wi-Fi chip in it, and then worked on the software. And you think, like, well, what in the heck would the software do? Well, that was where we differentiated. We could make it super simple to set up, where you just literally plug it in and kind of wave your phone over it, and it automatically authenticates because we know you're signed in on your phone already. We share a secret ultrasonically across the two devices and log you in, and the thing just turns on and starts working. Maybe it asks you what your SSID, or what you want to name your house, and that's it. And the mesh network figures itself out and makes Wi-Fi across the home work. So what was interesting about, like, why does that story, make sense in this context? Well, we could have focused on the hardware first. We could have tried to build a router that was a little bit better than everybody, but we used the same chips that everybody else used. What we focused on was the thing that was really differentiating. And we discovered that by looking at what customers were having a problem with and then building something that they would really love. And so we set out with two goals early on. One of them was, let's build a product that people love, which sounds crazy when it comes to a router, because who loves their router? It's like a garbage disposal. If it works, that's great. But if it doesn't work, it, people want to throw it out the window. So could we make it so that people love it and appreciate it? And then secondly, could we revolutionize the space so that other companies would respond to us? Because Google was never going to be a major router manufacturer like Linksys or something like that. We were just going to build one product that was, superior. So after about 2 or 3 months in the market, we started looking at tweets, and people were saying stuff like, I love this product. I absolutely love it. And that was all by design, where we did ethnographic studies. We really observed people that were using routers, and we started off as cheaply as possible. And every step that we took, we tried to build confidence without investing too much. So literally we started with 3 people. Actually, we started with like 2 people and no hardware, and slowly built the concept of it by making these micro steps and prototyping every single step of the way. So every level that you could think, like, we weren't just prototyping the overall product, we were prototyping every step of the product as we went. And that helped us save a lot of time and a lot of pain by correcting and pivoting and continuing to adjust our approach that ended up with a product that people really loved. And I do that every day. I mean, just today, I was talking to a team about some ideas and how we could do it more cheaply and quicker and faster without having to, one of the fallacies I think that sometimes happens is, I just need traffic directed to my app, or I just need traffic directed to my service, and then I'll be successful. And it's the wrong way of thinking, because I would rather have very low traffic with people that love it than super, super high traffic with, a lot of people bouncing. And I think that mindset, you have to kind of flip it around for the innovator and say, like, okay, it's better for you to figure out how to get people to really love something. And so that, that's kind of what Alberto calls the right it for me. I using the word love a lot, but it's the right it. Figuring out that you have a product that's really going to win in the market is understanding the customer and thinking through why you're going to differentiate, and trying to do that very, very cheaply and in incremental steps. And in the long run, that just saves you so much energy that you can apply to your goals as a product to make it successful. So I use it every day. I mean, I find it to be a very flexible and adaptable framework as well, because there's like I was saying, at every stage there's some way to simplify and some way to make it easy to stay focused and to take feedback. And I think that's also a really important part of it, where you have to be open to listening to what's happening. And so the idea of like testing and probing and testing and probing, it's you have to be able to absorb that and say, okay, I'm pivoting here. Because you have to like just sign up that a lot of your initial ideas may be wrong as you're developing a concept, and to hone in on the right set of things requires an open-mindedness. And at the end of it, you'll have this success. Like let's say that you're lucky and you build a product that really is great. People will look at it and say, like, that was amazing. That's an amazing innovation. It just came out of nowhere. And Alberto is saying really clearly that it didn't come out of nowhere. Where it came out of was like, it's like an 8-year overnight success. It's one of these things where it was incrementally built with the customer in mind, and with the building the right thing as you went, and not building the stadium, like building like just having street soccer at first, getting a community together excited about a sport, getting more people excited about it, then building the stadium once you have the reason for that stadium to exist. Unlike at the beginning, we were talking about Google Plus, which in my mind is kind of like an empty stadium without, a reason to go there. It's like, build something that people really care about. And in my mind, that's, goes back to just principle number one of like, build something that customers want to use.
Something that really stood out to me about like just kind of like what you've mentioned is like having a small amount of customers who love your product versus like having a large amount of customers that like use your product and like feel kind of meh, which is interesting because like at part-time I do work as an angel investment scout as well. And something that like angel investors really, really love to harp on is like traction and having like hockey stick growth and things like that. So like in your point of view, how do you think you balance the idea between this notion of having a small amount of customers who love your product versus having a large amount of customers that feel very average towards your product, but at the same time knowing that you need volume in order to drive the sort of attention that would bring in the kind of investors that you need?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. And I don't think that those comments are perpendicular to each other. So I'm talking about the early stage, as you're doing something, you want to validate that people really care about it. And so that generally, it needs to be small so you can observe them and you could pick who you're talking to. Now, if you're smart, you're going to build something that's generally going to be used by lots of people. So in the case of like of Wi-Fi or of like Bumble, you have a large audience that you can go after. But you want to start with a community that you can kind of observe and take feedback from. And so to get the hockey stick to occur, I think what you need to do is find something that's virally exciting for people, like that they will genuinely care about it. And you can't do that with just driving volume to something. So because really what you're looking for is not the initial usage, you're looking for reoccurring usage. That's the key. So like for example, if Amazon was built on the principle of like people would come in and buy something and never come back, the company wouldn't exist today. But people come back because of the, you know, the customer service, the speed of delivery, the convenience. You know, so there's lots of reasons why people return to buy more things, and that's a key thing to figure out. Is people love it, but it's not just initial interest; it's reoccurring interest. So that's why I'm saying, like, if you focus on a small community and build from there, you can iterate and figure out like how to parlay it into a bigger and bigger community that expands from that core. But if you don't have a thing that's loved from the beginning, you can't scale something that's like mediocre. Like that hockey stick will never happen. And like there's a bunch of examples that we used early on. So like Twitter, when Twitter first happened, a lot of people came in and were kind of like, this sucks. There's nothing to this thing. Like this isn't any good. But they did get a lot of usage, but there were a lot of people that stuck. So even though, you know, maybe 50% of people or maybe higher than that came in and used it and left, there were a sustaining group of people that were reoccurring users over time that were enough to make that company viable and to have enough traffic. You know, same thing for take a different one. If you're really lucky, you'll come up with an idea that's explosively viral, like Facebook. And but notice how they started is like with the small communities. They iterated, you know, cut corners. You know, it's hacked a lot. Tried to quickly deliver things that their audiences wanted by listening to them and growing that audience. And so as they grew that audience, it went from a set of loyal people, excited college students, to a broader network of people. People wanted to join. They wanted to connect with their friends. They wanted to use the platform and get in, and they had to fight people off initially. So it all starts with like a small set of people, and then you know you want to build a product that's going to be generally interesting to a large audience, but I think you need to hockey stick into that incrementally. Throwing traffic at something is just not the right way to do it, because you haven't identified the primary value to a customer by just driving traffic. It just never works out, in my opinion.
I remember learning that the hard way when I was building when I was working on my first startup. So this was back in the days when I was a student entrepreneur, and I was working on I believe I was working on an app for to match high school students to their best fit universities. This was right around the time when I first learned about how to use like Facebook ads. Right, I think it was like it was a seminar, I think, in one of the college entrepreneur clubs that I was a part of, and they talked about how do you use Facebook ads. All right, step one, create an ad. Step two, do this and do that. Right, and then I ran it for myself. I think for the very first time that day, I spent around I think $50. You know, put together some little copy, and then like, you know, posted it, and then I remember I remember like I think 6 hours later, you know, checking my Facebook ads, and then I sat there and I looked at the impressions amount, and I said it was like around 104,700, 104,000, right? And I was like, wow, I think I'm gonna be rich. I got 104,000 impressions, until I realized that impressions didn't really mean a whole lot, and clicks didn't mean a whole lot either. And then the only metric that really mattered was like, you know, how many people like kind of like put their email address down for like sort of like that preview sign up, which I got zero of. I got zero of those initial emails. But I think I had like 105,000 impressions, and like out of those 105,000 impressions, maybe like 15,000 clicks. And I was just like, I thought I was on the top of the world until I realized it wasn't. So that was that.
I think, you know, the good news is you did that with $50 instead of $50 million of other people's money, or your own money, your friends and family's money. And you only spent an afternoon doing it and not, you know, 5 years. So I think that's actually a really good example of pretotyping, as a matter of fact, of like doing it very, very quickly, as scrappily as possible, and trying to validate and build confirmation. So that's a great lesson, actually, and a great example of doing it fast and failing fast.
The funny thing was though I didn't know about prototyping that time, and I did end up going forward with building the app. So
Okay.
actually, I did do the thing that you weren't supposed to do, and I had a team, and we went ahead and built the thing, and we expected people to come through because we took people at their what's it called, like, not the skin in the game part, but like the part where Alberto talks about like don't listen to opinion.
Yeah.
We built the whole thing based off of like opinion. So that's
Yeah.
note to the listeners, don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely the idea of doing like customer panels and customer research is important. So I wouldn't say that listening to customers and the voice of the customer isn't important, because I think it really, really is. It's really the core of it. But I think the thing that Alberto's talking about is like, don't take it on face value. Like, go validate that their intent is real. So people will tell you anything. They'll tell you, like we joked about, like farcical pretotyping examples, like beer for dogs. Like generally you probably wouldn't give your dog alcohol, but you could probably figure out a good pretotype for it. And customers will probably say like, heck yeah, I'd buy beer for dogs, But then when it came down to it, would they really buy it, and would they really show intent? I think probably good judgment would get in their way. Maybe not. I don't know. It's hard to tell on that one, actually. But you have to validate intent. That's the key. So it's not just about not listening to those voices early, because you should. It's just when they say something, you want to test it out. So you move beyond the opinions and get into data, and that's really the important part of it. Is like you could still get like Alberto calls it opinion land. You can get stuck in opinion land forever and never leave it. I mean, and just stay in there. And you can have customers telling you that you're exactly right. But the key is like, get off of first base and figure out if what they're saying stands up when you kind of turn that into like an intent. And I think that that's the trick of pretotyping, is figuring out those early stage intents so that you can validate whether what you're hearing is real.
Yeah, exactly. I think so. Couple more questions. Really, a couple more questions. What would you say is like the most memorable product that you've ever made, and why?
Uh, Let me think about that for a second. Well, they're the ones I think that helped people. And so one of the interesting ones was we built an alert tracker for major storms that was hooked into I think it's called NISD. It's kind of the alerting network for national storms and local storms. And one of the ideas that an engineer had was like, what if we built that directly into Android, so that when a storm hit, it would alert you. So now, you get Amber Alerts and all kinds of stuff on your phone. But at the time, this was like a crazy idea, like to actually do a proactive, kind of alert that you were in danger, because we saw your geo position and we knew that something big was happening in that region. We could say like, hey, there's a flood about to happen. Well, unfortunately, there was a tornado that went through Oklahoma, and but the good news was that we were able to save a few people's lives, because we did the alert early and they got out of the path of the tornado. And we worked really hard to be able to describe what actions to take and what to do. And we were lucky enough to actually build software that did something, that really changed people's lives. So that was probably one of the most interesting ones that I ever built, was with a very small set of people, maybe 5 or 6 people. We were able to do that, and we earned back our salary in, you know 10 or 15 lives. So we that was really fun and exciting to find that out. And we never really publicized that, and talked about it too much, but it was a thing that we knew to be true. And uh, it's really gratifying to be able to do projects where you're doing something for humanity in general. So those, and at Google, like, those things they weren't low hanging fruit, I would say, but they were available to us because we had, such a ubiquitous platform at the time to be able to try things. And so the crisis management system was one of those innovations that really was um, an interesting game changer, and it did benefit people in general. So I don't know, that would be one. Definitely Google Wi-Fi. I was very proud of that one. That one was prototyping from beginning to end, and it was one of those projects that almost got killed 50 times. So one of the things about Innovator that's really not covered in prototyping all that much, but Alberto knows this is true, and probably anybody that's ever stuck their neck out to go build something, is that there are a lot of people that are going to tell you no, and in a big company, and if you have investors, and you have to have a thick skin, and confidence that you're going to be right. But almost every cool project I've ever come up with, people told me that should be killed. And the confidence that's required is something that you like, only a certain handful of people have. Not everybody can stand up to their company or their investors and say, I think I'm right. Like Elon Musk, or maybe Larry Page and Sergey, like, we're not going to listen to our investors. We're going to do what we think is correct. But I think that that's a part that the listeners should definitely think about, is that if you think you're right, you should try to move forward. You should try to protect your idea and give it a safe harbor and enough time to, to quickly iterate and validate. I think you owe that to yourself, to try to take your idea from the ideation stage before it ends up on the cutting room floor, like those 100,000 ideas at Google that are sitting in a database, probably still. Anyway, those are a couple. I'd say Google Wi-Fi and the crisis management system. But I've been proud of, I don't know if anybody's listening on my teams. I've loved working with all of my teams, so it's been a fun ride. It's been a fun ride at Google and at Amazon.
Absolutely, absolutely. What's something that you've been what's like a personal habit that you've been trying to prototype in your own life?
A personal habit. Um, let's see. I've been trying to be more mindful, I would say. That's being present, and being available to people. And so, like, that might sound ethereal or just kind of abstract, but it's trying to really connect and be here in the moment, instead of thinking about other things. And especially over VC, I find that connecting is super important, and showing that you're listening, and trying to show that you are understanding and considering what the other person is saying. And it's something that maybe in person is easier to do, I think, but it's on VC. I found that I have to be a lot more vocal about it, and be more in the moment and talking about what I'm thinking. And I find it exhausting, actually, to be that present. But I think as a leader of a bunch of teams, like, that's super important, at least for me right now, is making sure that people feel like that they're connected with me, and that they're able to be heard, and they're able to be understood and considered. And I want to feel the same way. And so the best way I know how to do that is to show that and to be real. And that's it, I don't know, maybe that's too personal of a story, but that's kind of what I'm focused on right now, is just being really mindful of here and now in the moment. And I don't have to prototype that too much, but I do reflect on it after a day. Like I was just checked out during that meeting. I was looking at email. I just didn't even care about what anyone was saying, and it's like, what does that say to the other people in the room? I shouldn't even go to the meeting if I'm not going to be super present. So um, I think it's an important thing that we don't get too focused into our little bubble of trying to get something done. That really what matters is the discussion happening right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course it's easier said than done, because I think sometimes,
Absolutely.
yeah, our minds have a tendency to, fly across all sorts of things. And in particular, I think when we're anticipating something, or like, when we're nervous for something, when we're, the temptation becomes even more, kind of like there to try to think about what's going to happen rather than what's happening in the present. And so it's something that I think I've been trying to train myself to do as well, is to, like, kind of like focus on one task at a time, because I naturally do, I don't know if it's like a creative thing, but I naturally do daydream a lot. I do daydream a ton, just like especially, like, I feel like when I'm cooking, like, I'm always like trying to ideate and like think of like new stuff, or like new ways to, like, do things and tackle my existing projects, which is how I end up cutting my fingers when I'm chopping vegetables.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's really smart, is to kind of have a lucid thinking pattern. I was just watching a show. I forget what it was called. It was about, are we in a simulation, or are we in real life right now? And I thought it was an interesting conceptually and curious, but it's like, every person can be disassociative to what's happening it's part of our imagination. We can kind of escape to another reality. And like the Matrix is an example, and a simulation run by some uber beings might be another one of those things. But just daydreaming is a totally another way of just being in another world, where you kind of let your background threads run. And I think you come up with better ideas actually when it's a background thread, because all of a sudden it'll kind of come to the foreground. It's like, oh, that's a good idea. um, but unless you let your mind kind of go of the always running and always being busy, and I think that that's the death of an entrepreneur or an innovator, is like running yourself ragged, doing execution. You've got to have time to reflect, and to step back and be objective. So I think that that's a good thing. Is just like every innovator I've ever talked to, they have something that they do, just like you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And that lucid thinking is also a perfect avenue to escape the doldrums sometimes of the COVID life. You can kind of like escape to a different dimension. It's like, imagine where we could be living this sort of existence instead, doing this sort of thing. And
It's
you
kind
know
of funny though, don't you think, that if you would have asked people 2 years ago, do you want more time to do stuff that you want to do? People would say yes. So now we have like an extra maybe 3 hours where you're not commuting, or you're not having to spend time, uh, you know, doing things like sitting in an office when you're at lunch or things like that. You can actually go and do a personal thing. So don't you think? I mean, it's an interesting concept of we kind of complain about how it is all the time, but who wouldn't want more time to be curious and learning new things? But the thing I miss the most is like not being interacting with people. I think that's the key thing. It's like I feel like super lonely during COVID, and it's like even over VC, you don't have the same connectedness of like just having that hallway chat and you know
yeah.
learning about people.
Yeah, I know. I miss that too. I miss that too. I do miss, being able to congregate with large amounts of people. I mean, those are the kind of like the environments I feel like I thrive in a little bit more. And like I've had to, and like I know there's been a lot of like virtual events popping up here and there, but it's like I don't go to most virtual events because I mean, one, my eyes can only take so much screen time in a day. Like I try to like limit my screen time to a certain amount, and then afterwards, like I try to like play puzzles or play crosswords or or go out for a walk, because I literally I feel like if I look at my screen too much, I will get headaches, and that's not going to be good for me. So I do look forward to the day where like I think I'll probably get vaccinated, I think, in a few months or something like that. So looking forward to when I'll be able to meet people regularly again.
Yeah. Will we know how to do it? I think so. I think it'll be like riding a bike. It'll be fun. It'll be like a party almost. It'll be exciting every day.
Yeah, we'll have a big party wherever you are.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so this was our podcast with Pat Copeland. Pat, thank you for hopping on. We really appreciated your insights and everything that you had to give. Um, and remember, to the listeners, fail Ferrari fast and McDonald's cheap.